The alien ship drifted silently through the darkness of space near the fourth planet from Earth's sun. Commander Vrel stood at his station watching the screens in front of him. His three eyes moved quickly as he studied the data coming from his sensors. For 3 weeks now, his crew had been watching this solar system, trying to understand the species that lived here. The humans were supposed to be simple and not very advanced. They had only learned to travel faster than light 50 years ago. They had built a few colonies on nearby star systems, but nothing impressive. The Galactic Council had classified them as Level 2, which meant they were barely worth paying attention to. Just another young species taking its first steps into the larger universe. But something felt wrong to Vrel. The numbers did not match what they were seeing. His science officer called out to him from across the control room. Her voice sounded confused and maybe a little worried. She told him she was detecting massive energy signatures near the red planet. Vrel walked over to her console and looked at the readings himself. The planet was called Mars by the humans. They said it was a farming project meant to grow food for Earth. According to all their public records, it was just agricultural domes and atmosphere processors. Nothing special or threatening. Vrel asked what kind of energy signatures she was detecting. His science officer's mandibles clicked together nervously as she spoke. She said there were fusion reactors down there. Not just a few, but hundreds of them. Actually, thousands of them. The power output was equal to a small sun. Vrel felt his skin grow cold. Farming projects did not need that much power. Not even close. He ordered her to pull up visual scans of the planet so they could see what was really happening down there. The holographic display changed, showing Mars in perfect detail. At first, it looked normal enough. Red dirt covered most of the surface. There were dome structures scattered around. Machines pumped oxygen into the thin atmosphere. But then Vrel noticed something strange about the pattern. The domes were not placed randomly. They formed geometric shapes that stretched across entire continents, mathematical patterns that seemed deliberate and planned. He told his science officer to zoom in on one particular area. The image grew larger, showing what looked like construction sites. Enormous cylindrical structures stuck up out of the ground. Each one was several kilometers wide. They had been covered with camouflage netting and holographic projectors to hide them. But the Zethran sensors could see through the deception easily. His science officer whispered that those were not grain silos. Vrel agreed with her. Those were weapon emplacements. Big ones. He pulled up a full scan of the entire planet and overlaid it with their energy readings. The truth hit him like a physical punch to his chest. The whole planet was a machine. Every canyon had been converted into a thruster assembly. Every mountain range hid shield generators. The polar ice caps were not ice at all, but massive coolant systems for the reactors. Mars was not a farming colony. It was a warship. A planet-sized warship. Vrel immediately ordered his communications officer to contact the Galactic Council. This was too important to keep to themselves. While his crew worked to establish the connection, Vrel continued studying the data. How had humanity managed to do this? How had they hidden a project this massive from everyone? The resources alone should have bankrupted their entire civilization. Then he saw something that made everything clear. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was nearly empty. For the past 50 years, humanity had been mining it constantly. They claimed they needed the materials for colonial expansion. Everyone believed them. But every single piece of rock and metal had actually been fed into this construction project. His communications officer announced that Admiral Kesh was on the line. A hologram appeared showing a Vorian female. Her scales glittered in the light from her command center. She asked why Vrel was contacting her with such urgency. Vrel took a breath and told her they had discovered something about the humans. Their Mars colony was not what they claimed it to be. The entire planet had been converted into a weapons platform, a mobile one that could move through space. Admiral Kesh's eyes narrowed. She told him to explain everything. Vrel transmitted all the data his ship had collected. For several long moments, the Admiral studied it in complete silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was very controlled. She asked how long this had been under construction. Vrel said based on the depth of the infrastructure it had to be at least 40 years, maybe longer than that. The Admiral asked if they had detected nothing during all that time. Vrel explained that the humans had been very clever about it. They used their colonial expansion as cover. Every ship and trade route and diplomatic meeting was designed to make everyone look somewhere else while they built this monster. The Admiral asked about combat capability. Vrel pulled up his tactical analysis. He said if his calculations were correct, Mars had enough firepower to destroy a moon. Its shields could withstand bombardment from an entire battle fleet. And if those thruster assemblies worked the way they were designed, then the planet could move, slowly. But it could definitely move through space under its own power. The Admiral repeated his words quietly. A planet that could fight and travel. The humans had built a siege weapon. Vrel said there was more information she needed to know. He had been analyzing human communications and news broadcasts. They were not hiding this from each other. Every human knew about something called Project Sentinel. Their entire species had been working on it together for half a century. The Admiral asked what else the analysis showed. Vrel displayed intercepted files on her screen. There were plans for Venus already in early stages of conversion. Jupiter's moons were being hollowed out and filled with weapons. Even Earth's moon showed signs of militarization, though more subtle than Mars. Admiral Kesh realized what this meant. They were not building a defense fleet. They were turning their entire solar system into a fortress. Vrel corrected her. A fortress that could move. If they could mobilize Mars, they could do it with other planets too. He asked her to imagine an armada of weaponized planets moving through space. The Admiral was quiet for a long time. Then she said the Council needed to see this information immediately. She asked what they should do while waiting. Vrel said his ship would continue surveillance but keep their distance. The Admiral agreed and told him not to engage or communicate with the humans. If they realized their secret had been discovered, they might accelerate their timeline. She also told him to prepare for rapid departure. If Mars activated its weapons, she wanted his ship out of that solar system instantly. The hologram faded, leaving Vrel alone with his thoughts. He looked at Mars on his display, that innocent-looking red dot in the darkness. Humanity had built a monster and disguised it as a garden. The question burning in his mind was why. What threat had they seen that required such extreme measures? Or worse, what ambitions did they have for the galaxy? Deep below the surface of Mars, in a control center buried 3 kilometers down, Colonel Jake Morrison watched a monitor. It showed the alien scout ship hanging in space nearby. He spoke to the woman standing next to him. Captain Lisa Grant had her arms crossed as she studied the same display. Morrison said simply that they know. Grant asked if they should activate the defense grid. Morrison said no, not yet. He told her to let them look, and let them report back to their council. Grant asked why. Morrison smiled, though his eyes remained cold. He said the council needed to understand something important about humanity. Grant asked what that was. Morrison said they did not build weapons to start wars. They built them to make sure they never lost one. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive spherical room where representatives from 300 different species floated in their own gravity fields. They were arranged in circles around a central platform. Today the chamber was filled with angry voices as Admiral Kesh's report played on holographic displays for everyone to see. High Counselor Thane was a being made of crystal, whose body bent light into rainbow patterns. He called for order in a voice that rang like a bell through the entire space. The noise stopped immediately. 300 pairs of eyes in all their different forms focused on the rotating image of Mars. Thane spoke to those who had arrived late. He said they had confirmed Commander Vrel's initial report. The human colony on Mars was not for farming. It was a weapon. A planet-sized weapon that could move on its own, and carried enough firepower to threaten any world in the galaxy. Counselor Bren stood up from his position. He was massive and his body bristled with anger. He said this was an act of war. The humans had violated the Armament Limitation Treaty. He demanded they send a fleet immediately to dismantle this thing. Counselor Yara was a delicate insect creature who valued precision in all things. She reminded everyone that the humans never signed that treaty. Technically, they had broken no laws. Bren shot back that then the law was not good enough. No species should have this much power. It upset the balance that kept the galaxy stable. Admiral Kesh appeared as a hologram at the center platform. Her form was larger than life. She said with respect that humanity already had this power. The question was not whether the council approved, but how they would respond to reality. Thane's crystal body pulsed with thought. He asked the Admiral about her tactical assessment. She had suggested Mars could be operational within months. He wanted to know about defensive capabilities. Kesh replied that they were formidable. Their simulations showed a direct assault would cost thousands of ships and millions of lives. The planet's shield generators were powered by its core. Normal bombardment would be useless. They would need stellar-class weapons to destroy it. A shocked silence fell over everyone. Stellar-class weapons were forbidden except in the most desperate situations. They could set entire atmospheres on fire. They could shatter the plates that held continents together. They could make worlds uninhabitable for thousands of years. Counselor Mira belonged to a species known for compassion. Her voice sounded horrified when she asked if Kesh was suggesting they destroy Earth's solar system. The Admiral said firmly she was suggesting nothing. She was only presenting facts. If they chose military action, it would be costly and brutal. There would be no easy victories. Counselor Venn of the Trade Consortium raised one of his tentacles. His species focused on economics and practical solutions. He said perhaps they were thinking about this wrong. What if they offered humanity a seat on the council? Full membership came with responsibilities and oversight. They could regulate human military development through diplomacy instead of war. Brent scoffed and called it bribery. He asked if they would reward deception. Venn said he would prevent a war that could devastate multiple star systems. The humans were resourceful. They had accomplished in 50 years what took most species 500 years. He suggested they imagine channeling that innovation toward peaceful purposes. Thane considered this carefully. He said it was an interesting proposal. However, it assumed humanity wanted council membership. What if they preferred to remain independent? Admiral Kesh spoke again. She said she had been studying human history. They were a species that fought among themselves often. Yet when faced with external threats, they unified with remarkable speed. Project Sentinel represented unified effort across their entire planet. Every nation and culture had contributed. That level of cooperation was unprecedented for them. Thane asked what she was implying. Kesh said that something had scared them badly. 50 years ago, humanity achieved faster than light travel. They sent out exploration ships and made first contact with several species. Then 47 years ago, they recalled every ship. Their entire space program went silent for 6 months. When they came back, their public focus shifted to colonial expansion, but their military spending increased by 3,000%. Yara's antennae twitched with interest. She asked what happened during those 6 months. Kesh said they did not know. Whatever it was, humanity had classified it at the highest levels. But it was significant enough to redirect their entire civilization toward military preparation. Thane's light grew dim as he thought. He said they saw something, or met someone. Something that convinced them they needed a weapon like Mars. Mira suggested that maybe someone told them something. About the galaxy. About the council itself. The implications hung heavy in the chamber. The galaxy was vast, and not all its inhabitants were represented in the council. There were hostile civilizations out there. Ancient powers. Things lurking in the dark between stars that even the council preferred not to discuss. Bren's voice became softer. He asked if humanity built this as a deterrent. Then they must ask who they were trying to deter. Kesh said quietly that perhaps they wanted to deter everyone. She told them to think about it from the human perspective. They were newcomers to a galaxy with established powers and ancient rivalries and rules they had no part in creating. They had no allies and no protectors. Building Mars ensured that no one could threaten Earth without paying a terrible price. Ben's tentacles moved in what his species used to show understanding. He said it was mutually assured destruction. An old concept, but effective. Bren insisted it was madness. One misunderstanding or one aggressive commander, and Mars could be used to attack instead of defend. Yara pointed out the same could be said of any weapon, including those in Bren's own fleet. Before Bren could respond, an alert sounded through the chamber. A new hologram appeared showing Commander Vrel's ship. Vrel's voice carried urgency. He said Mars was activating. He was reading massive power surges across the planet. The weapon emplacements were coming online. The chamber erupted in chaos. Thane's voice cut through like a laser. He asked if they were targeting Vrel's vessel. Vrel said negative. They were not targeting anything. But the planet was moving. He repeated that Mars was moving. Every eye in the chamber focused on the hologram. In real time, they watched as Mars began to shift its trajectory. Hundreds of thruster assemblies fired in perfect coordination. Their combined force gradually pushed the massive world onto a new course. Thane demanded to know where it was going. Vrel's science officer could be heard calculating frantically in the background. She said if Mars maintained this course and acceleration, it would exit the solar system in approximately 2 years. The current heading would take it toward the Perseus arm. The Perseus Arm was a region of space known for ancient ruins and mysterious signals. Survey vessels sometimes disappeared there. The Council had maintained a hands-off policy about that sector for centuries. Bren declared this proved they were going on the offensive, but Kesh shook her head. She said they might be going on patrol instead. She requested permission to open communication with humanity. They needed to understand intentions before taking action. Thane considered for a long moment. The fate of billions rested on his next words. He granted permission but told the Admiral to be cautious. They might be witnessing the birth of either a valuable ally or a dangerous enemy. On Mars in the Central Command Center, Colonel Morrison watched the Council's transmission on his monitors. The alien scout ship had good communications, but humanity's listening posts were better. Captain Grant said they were scared. Morrison replied that was good. Fear bred respect. They needed the Council to respect them before they would be treated as equals. Grant asked what would happen if they attacked. Morrison gestured to the tactical display where Earth and Venus and the Moon and Jupiter's moons all showed green status indicators. He said if the Council attacked, they would learn why this was called Project Sentinel. Humanity was not prey in this galaxy. Not anymore. He pressed a button on his console. He told communications to prepare a transmission to the Galactic Council. It was time to tell them exactly what they were dealing with. Admiral Kesh stood in the communication center of her flagship surrounded by the Council's finest diplomats and military advisors. Before her, a holographic interface waited to be activated. It was ready to establish humanity's first official contact with Galactic Authority. Counselor Mira's voice came through the quantum link reminding her that the goal was understanding, not confrontation. Humanity had surprised them. They should not surprise humanity with hostility. Kesh nodded, though she kept her tactical display active. Her battle fleet stood ready at strategic points around the Sol system, just in case something went wrong. Her communications officer announced they were opening the channel now. The hologram flickered to life, and for the first time Kesh saw a human face. The man appeared middle-aged by their standards, with sharp eyes and dark hair that was graying at the sides. He wore a military uniform that was simple but dignified. The insignia belonged to something called the United Earth Defense Command. Kesh introduced herself as Admiral of the Galactic Council. Fleet? She asked who she was speaking to. Man said he was Colonel Jake Morrison, commanding. Officer of Mars Defense Platform Sentinel-1. Though, he supposed the planet-sized warship label sounded more dramatic. His tone was calm and almost casual. Kesh felt surprised. Humans seemed to appreciate humor even in tense situations. She told him he was aware the Council had discovered his project. Morrison leaned back in his chair. He said they had been tracking the scout ship for 3 weeks. They knew someone would figure it out eventually. The real question was what the Council planned to do about it. Kesh said that depended on what Morrison planned to do with Mars. A weapon of that magnitude threatened the stability of the entire sector. Morrison's eyebrows rose. He said respectfully that they had threatened no one. They had built a defensive installation on their own planet, using their own resources in their own solar system. Last he checked, that was not illegal. Kesh started to mention the scale, but Morrison interrupted her. He said the scale was necessary. Then he asked her a question. How many species in the galaxy could say they had never been conquered, never been subjugated, never had their home world destroyed by a superior force? Kesh paused. The answer made her uncomfortable. She admitted very few species could claim that. Morrison said humanity intended to be one of them. His voice grew harder. Humanity was new here. They did not know all the players or all the rules or all the ancient grudges that drove galactic politics. What they did know was they were alone. No alliances and no protection. Nothing but themselves. So yes, they built Mars. And they would build more if necessary. Kesh said he spoke as if the Council was his enemy. Morrison said he spoke as if the Council might become one. Or might not. That was the problem. They did not know. He pulled up a display of his own. 47 years ago, one of their exploration ships encountered something out past the Perseus Arm. They did not talk about it publicly. It was classified at levels most of their own people could not access. But he would tell Kesh because she needed to understand. The Admiral leaned forward with her full attention focused. Morrison said the exploration vessel Pioneer made contact with a civilization. They did not know who those beings were. The transmission was brief and badly damaged. But they got one message through clearly. He paused and his face looked grim. They warned humanity. told them to hide and arm themselves and prepare for what was coming. Then they went silent. Permanently, Kesh asked what was coming. Morrison said they did not get a chance to explain. But human scientists analyzed everything from that transmission, the background radiation and stellar maps and timeline. Whatever that civilization was, they were old, advanced, powerful, and they were terrified. Kesh felt cold inside. She said there was nothing in council records about this. Morrison said that was because it happened in a region the council did not patrol, a region they actively avoided. He locked eyes with her through the hologram. He asked why that was. What was out there that the mighty Galactic Council did not want to face? The question hung in the air like a blade. Kesh knew the answer. Every council member knew. There were things in the galaxy older than any current civilization. Ruins that did not match any known architecture. Signals that repeated patterns no natural phenomenon could create. Dead worlds that had been sterilized by weapons beyond understanding. The council had a policy about it. Do not look too close. Do not ask too many questions. Maintain peace in the parts of the galaxy they controlled and ignore the rest. Kesh finally spoke. She said they called them the silent zones. Regions where ships disappeared and sensors failed and things happened that could not be explained. The council's position was that exploration of these zones was not worth the risk. Morrison repeated her words. Not worth the risk, or too scary to confront. He asked what if those zones were expanding? What if whatever was out there was not content to stay in the dark? Kesh said he was speculating. Morrison said they were preparing. When humanity got that warning, their entire species had to make a choice. Stay blind and vulnerable, hoping for the best, or forge themselves into something that could fight back. Kesh said by becoming a threat themselves. Morrison corrected her. By becoming strong enough that threatening them was not worth it. His voice softened slightly. They did not want war with the council. They wanted partnership. But partnership meant mutual respect, and respect came from strength. Mars proved they were not helpless, that they were worth negotiating with as equals. Kesh considered this carefully. The human's logic was sound if harsh. She said the council would not easily accept a newcomer species with weapons technology that rivaled their own. Morrison stood up, showing his full height in the hologram. He said then the council needed to decide what kind of galaxy it wanted. One where strength was suppressed and newcomers were kept weak, or one where every species had the right to defend itself regardless of when they achieved spaceflight. Behind Kesh, Counselor Mira's voice came through her private channel. She said Morrison made a compelling argument. Counselor Bren countered that he made a dangerous argument. This led to arms races and escalation. Kesh muted their feed and spoke directly to Morrison. She said she needed to know his intentions. Mars was moving. Where was it going and why? Morrison pulled up a star chart. He said the Perseus arm, as Commander Vrel already calculated, specifically to coordinates near where the Pioneer made its last transmission. They were going to find out what happened to that civilization, and if there was a threat out there, they would face it before it reached Earth. Kesh said that was a suicide mission. Morrison said only if they were alone. He met her gaze steadily. The Council had resources and experience and knowledge humanity lacked. Humanity had Mars and the willingness to go places the Council would not. What if they worked together? Let Mars be the Council's advance guard. They would explore the silent zones and investigate the mysteries and face whatever dangers lurked out there. In exchange, the Council would provide support and intelligence and legitimacy. It was a bold proposal. Dangerous even, but Kesh could not deny its appeal. How many centuries had the Council spent avoiding difficult questions? How many threats had they ignored because investigation was too risky? She said she would need to consult with the High Counselor. Morrison said, of course. But he added one more thing. Whether the Council accepted or not, Mars was still going. They would prefer to go with friends rather than alone. But they were going regardless. The transmission ended, leaving Kesh in silence. Around her, advisors began speaking at once, but she held up a hand for quiet. She told communications to connect her with High Counselor Thane. She ordered them to prepare a full report. They had a decision to make and not much time to make it. On Mars, Morrison turned to Captain Grant. She asked if he thought they would accept. Morrison said he just threatened and propositioned them in the same conversation. It was 50-50 odds. Grant said those were good odds for humanity. 6 months ago, the Council did not know they existed. Now they were at the negotiating table with a planet-sized ace up their sleeve. Morrison looked at the star chart showing the dark region they were heading toward. Grant asked what would happen if they found something out there they could not handle. Even with Mars, Morrison's face grew serious. He said then at least Earth would have warning. Time to prepare. That was what Sentinel meant. They were the watchers on the wall. They went first so humanity did not go extinct. Far above them, through kilometers of machinery and armor, the red surface of Mars continued its slow journey toward the unknown. And across the galaxy, the Galactic Council prepared to vote on whether to help humanity face the darkness or watch them fall into it alone. The council chamber had never seen such division. For 3 days, representatives argued and threatened and negotiated. Humanity's proposal had split the galaxy's governing body into factions, with each having their own agenda. High Counselor Thane observed it all from his position at the chamber's center. His crystalline form had dimmed with exhaustion. The vote would happen today one way or another. The galaxy could not afford more delay. Thane announced it was time for final statements. He said Counselor Bren could speak first. The massive Corthan rose and his presence dominated the chamber. He said this council was founded on principles of cooperation and peace. For thousands of years they had maintained stability through careful regulation of military force. Now humanity, barely 50 years into space exploration, asked them to endorse their weapon. Worse, they asked the council to send them into regions they wisely avoided. This was foolishness born of youth and arrogance. Bren's scales rippled with conviction. He said if they approved this proposal, they would set a precedent. Every emerging species would militarize, claiming defense while building offense. The arms race would never end. He voted no and urged the council to demand humanity's compliance with their standards by force if necessary. Counselor Venn countered immediately. He asked if they heard what Bren just said. Compliance through force. They would prove humanity right that the galaxy was hostile, and strength was the only language anyone understood. The Trade Consortium representative gestured with multiple tentacles. He said he had reviewed Earth's economic data. Did anyone know what building Mars cost them? They reduced their standard of living by 30% for 4 decades. Every human and every nation sacrificed comfort and wealth for this project. That was not arrogance. That was fear, determination, and possibly wisdom. Counselor Yara's wings buzzed softly. She said the human colonels spoke truth they had been avoiding. The silent zones grew larger each century. Ships disappeared. Signals appeared and vanished. They told themselves these were natural phenomena, but they did not actually believe that. They were scared, so they ignored it. Bren challenged her, asking if she thought sending one weaponized planet would solve mysteries older than their civilizations. Yara said quietly no, but she thought humanity's willingness to try shamed them all. The debate raged on. Admiral Kesh observed from her ship, watching the political maneuvering with tactical interest. Alliances formed and dissolved in real time. The military factions sided with Bren, fearing competition. The scientific community supported investigation of the silent zones. The younger species saw opportunity in humanity's boldness. The ancient ones worried about disturbing what should remain undisturbed. Finally, Thane called for order. He said the arguments were heard. They would vote now. The proposal had 3 parts. 1 was to recognize humanity's right to maintain Mars as currently configured. 2 was to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. 3 was to provide material and intelligence support for Mars's expedition into the Perseus Arm. Each part would vote separately. The chamber fell silent. 300 representatives prepared their decision, knowing it would shape the galaxy's future. Thane said they would vote on Part 1, recognizing Mars's legitimacy. Lights flickered across the chamber as each representative cast their vote. Green for approval and red for denial. The holographic display showed the tally climbing. Green pulled ahead early, then red surged. The count swung back and forth until the final vote locked in. Thane announced 162 in favor and 138 opposed. Part 1 passed. Bren slammed a fist against his console but said nothing. Thane announced Part 2 about formal diplomatic relations with Earth. This vote proved less contentious. Whatever else humanity represented, opening dialogue was clearly better than isolation. The green lights dominated. Thane said 212 in favor and 88 opposed. Part 2 passed with strong majority. Counselor Mira allowed herself a small smile. Her faction had won this round. Thane announced Part 3 about material and intelligence support for the Perseus Arm expedition. This was the critical vote, and everyone knew it. Approving meant the council accepted responsibility for whatever humanity discovered. Denying it meant sending Mars alone potentially to its destruction. The votes came in slower this time. Representatives consulted advisors and calculated political costs and weighed fears against curiosity. The count climbed agonizingly toward the halfway mark. Green showed 149. Red showed 148. 3 votes remained. Thane's own vote would count only to break a tie. He watched the final 3 representatives reading their body language and their hesitation. Councillor Shen of the Archive Worlds finally voted. Green, 150. Councillor Forge from the Industrial Nexus voted next. Red, 149 to 150. The chamber held its breath. The final vote belonged to Councillor Dre, representing the frontier colonies, species that lived on the galaxy's edge closest to the unknown. Dre stood slowly. Unlike most representatives who voted silently through their consoles, she spoke aloud. She said her people knew what it was like to live with fear, to see the darkness and wonder what watched back. They had lost colonies to the silence, ships that never returned. The council sent condolences but no answers. Her voice strengthened. Humanity offered to seek those answers, alone if they must, but preferably with support. How could she vote against courage? She pressed her console. Green Thane announced 151 in favor and 149 opposed. Part 3 passed. The chamber erupted in equal parts celebration and outrage. Thane let it continue for a moment before calling for order. He said the vote was decided. Admiral Kesh was hereby authorized to coordinate with Earth Military Command. She would provide Mars with navigational data and sensor upgrades and whatever intelligence they had on the Perseus Arm region. Councillor Mira would lead the diplomatic mission to Earth and negotiate formal terms of their alliance. Bren warned there would be conditions: oversight and restrictions on Mars's weapon systems, protocols to prevent escalation. Thane agreed naturally. But those were details for negotiation. Today they had chosen a path forward. He looked directly at Bren. History would judge whether they were brave or foolish, but at least they would have tried. On Mars, Morrison received the news in the command center. Around him, his staff erupted in cheers. Captain Grant grinned widely. She said they did it. The council approved. Morrison said Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part: actually finding out what was out there. A hologram appeared showing Admiral Kesh's form materializing with perfect clarity. She said congratulations. It appeared they were partners now. Morrison thanked her. Though he suspected the real work began immediately. Kesh agreed. She was transmitting council intelligence files now. Everything they knew about the Perseus Arm and the silent zones and the phenomena observed there. It was not much, she admitted. Centuries of data, but most of it was absence of information rather than information itself. Morrison studied the incoming data streams. He said ships disappearing and signals stopping and colonies going silent. It read like a horror story. Kesh said it was a horror story, one they had been too afraid to finish reading. Her expression hardened. Mars would depart in 6 months, giving them time for upgrades and coordination. She was assigning 3 council ships to accompany them as advisors and liaisons. Morrison asked what would happen if they found something hostile. Kesh said then his planet-sized warship would earn its reputation, but she hoped for all their sakes that what they found was nothing. An old mystery with a mundane explanation, because if there really was something out there, then the galaxy had bigger problems than one heavily armed planet. Morrison said he understood. They would be ready. Over the following months, Mars became a hub of activity. Council engineers integrated their technology with human systems. Science teams from a dozen species studied the planet's capabilities. Diplomatic Corps established protocols and communication standards. But in quiet moments, Morrison would stand on the observation deck looking out at the stars. Somewhere in that darkness, an ancient civilization had screamed a warning before falling silent. Somewhere out there, the answer waited. Grant joined him, saying 6 months and 3 days until departure. She asked if he had second thoughts. Morrison admitted he had them every day. This could be humanity's greatest achievement or their biggest mistake. Grant said maybe both. He smiled at that. He told her what scared him most was not what they might find out there, but what it meant that they had to build Mars in the first place. That the galaxy was so dangerous and so uncertain that turning a planet into a weapon seemed like the reasonable choice. Grant said it meant they were survivors. It meant they adapted. She looked at the star chart displayed on the nearest screen. Whatever was out there, at least they were going to face it instead of hiding from it. That counted for something. Morrison nodded. He said it counted for everything. That was what made them human. Mars crossed the boundary of known space on a Tuesday morning by Earth Standard Time. Colonel Morrison marked the occasion with a simple announcement to his crew of 50,000 people. He said they were officially off the map. Whatever happened from here was history in the making. The planet moved through space at a speed that seemed impossibly slow on galactic scales, yet represented engineering that defied conventional physics. Behind it, 3 council ships kept pace with their crews, watching humanity's mobile fortress with a mixture of awe and worry. Admiral Kesh commanded the lead vessel. She maintained daily communication with Morrison, and their relationship had evolved from tense cooperation to something approaching mutual respect. She told him today was the day. If the Pioneers' data was accurate, they should be entering the region now. Morrison studied his tactical displays. All sensors were active. The defense grid was online. If something was here, they would find it. The first sign came not as a visual contact, but as an absence. Sensors began failing, with their readings turning to static. Communication with the council ships grew choppy, then cut out entirely. Even internal systems started having problems. Captain Grant reported from her station that it was like space itself was hostile to technology. She was rerouting through analog backups. They would have basic functionality but were essentially blind. Morrison corrected her, saying they were not blind. He pointed to a visual feed and told her to look. Through the observation windows, something appeared in the darkness. At first it looked like a nebula or a cloud of cosmic gas catching distant starlight. But the colors were wrong. Purples and greens that did not exist in nature swirled in patterns that hurt to watch. Grant whispered, asking what it was. Morrison replied it was unknown, but he was reading something inside it. Structures, massive ones. As Mars drifted closer, the structures became visible. They defied description like architectural impossibilities that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human senses could process. Towers curved through space in ways that violated geometry. Platforms connected to nothing yet somehow maintained position. And at the center there was a sphere. The sphere was perfect. Absolutely and mathematically perfect. 10,000 kilometers in diameter, with a surface that reflected nothing and absorbed everything. Looking at it was like staring into a hole in reality itself. Grant reported she was getting readings off the scale. That thing was generating energy equivalent to a quasar, but it was contained somehow. Focused. Morrison felt cold certainty settle into his bones. He said it was a machine. This whole region was all one massive machine. On the Valor's light, Admiral Kesh fought to maintain her ship's systems as they experienced the same interference. Her science officer worked through the chaos to analyze what they were seeing. The science officer told the Admiral these structures were older than anything in Council records. Millions of years and possibly tens of millions. And they were still active. Kesh asked what their purpose was. The officer said it was unknown. But the sphere in the center appeared to be a power source, and the energy signature matched residual radiation they had detected at other silent zones across the galaxy. Kesh understood immediately. There were more of these. This was not unique. The officer said it was a network. Ancient and vast and still operational. On Mars, Morrison received similar reports from his own science teams. But they had discovered something additional. One of his officers said she was picking up a signal. Very faint, but it was artificial. And it was human. Morrison said that was impossible. The officer said she was putting it through now. Static filled the command center, then resolved into a voice, weak and distorted but unmistakable. It said, "This is the exploration vessel Pioneer. If anyone receives this, do not approach the structures. Repeat, do not approach. They are not abandoned. They are waiting." The transmission cut off, replaced by silence. Morrison said quietly that was recorded 47 years ago. He told Grant to search for debris. The Pioneer went silent here. Its wreckage had to be somewhere. The search took hours, but Mars's sophisticated sensors eventually located it. The Pioneer floated in a stable orbit around one of the smaller structures, perfectly preserved. Too perfectly preserved. Grant reported there was no damage, no hull breaches, and no signs of combat or system failure. It was like the crew just shut everything down and stopped. Morrison made a decision. He said to prepare a shuttle. He was going over there. Grant protested, but Morrison said it was necessary. Whatever happened to that crew, they needed to know, and he would not ask anyone to take a risk he was not willing to take himself. An hour later, Morrison floated through the Pioneer's airlock accompanied by Grant and a security team. Their suits' lights cut through the darkness of the abandoned ship, revealing corridors frozen in time. They found the crew in the control room. 23 people seated at their stations, perfectly preserved. No signs of violence and no indication of struggle. They looked asleep except for their eyes. Their eyes were open, staring at the view screen. On that screen, despite 4 decades without power, an image remained. The sphere. That perfect, terrible sphere. Morrison approached the captain's chair. The body wore a name tag that read Captain Peter Hall. In his hand, he clutched a data pad. Morrison carefully removed it, downloading its contents to his suit's computer. Morrison read aloud from the pad's last entry. It said whoever finds this should know that they saw something they were not meant to see. The structures were not ruins. They were watching, waiting. The crew looked too long and thought too hard about what they might be. And something looked back. Grant's voice was tight with fear. She said they needed to leave now. But Morrison continued reading. It offered them knowledge. Everything. The secrets of the universe and the truth behind reality and the answer to every question. All they had to do was accept. The crew wanted to accept. Captain Hall could not stop them. One by one they looked at the sphere and really looked at it, and they understood something. Hall did not know what. They would not tell him. They just sat there smiling and staring at that thing. He was the only one left who had not looked. He would not look. He could not. Because he thought if he did, he would stop being human. The entry ended there. Morrison looked at his team. He said they were leaving. Everyone needed to maintain discipline. Do not look at the sphere directly. Do not think about what it might mean. They would get back to Mars and get their people away from here and report everything to the council. They evacuated quickly and professionally. But as Morrison's shuttle approached Mars, he saw crew members gathering at observation points looking out at the sphere. Hundreds of them drawn to the windows and staring. Morrison gave emergency orders to Grant. Clear all observation decks immediately. Close all external shutters. No one looks at that thing directly. Grant said people were resisting. They said they just wanted to understand. Morrison said he did not care what they wanted. This was an order. Any crew member who refused to comply was to be sedated and confined. That sphere was a weapon and it was already attacking them. The next hours were chaos. Mars's crew, highly trained and disciplined, fought against their own leadership to see the sphere. Some claimed they heard it calling to them. Others insisted they just needed to look for a moment to understand what it was trying to show them. Morrison made the hardest decision of his career. He ordered full lockdown, all external sensors offline. They would navigate on instruments only. Grant protested, saying that would leave them blind. Morrison said better blind than dead. Or worse than dead. He pulled up communication with Admiral Kesh. He told her they needed to leave now. This region was not just dangerous. It was actively hostile. That sphere and those structures were not machines. They were something else. Kesh's face showed she had reached similar conclusions. Her science officer looked at the sphere for 3 minutes. She started speaking in languages that did not exist and solving mathematical equations they had no terms for. Then she tried to vent the ship's atmosphere because she wanted them to join the truth. Whatever these things were, they affected minds. Morrison corrected her. Not just minds. Souls or consciousness or whatever made beings sentient. That was what they were targeting. He said they needed to coordinate a retreat. Get the council ships away from here and Mars would do the same. They would regroup at the boundary of known space. The withdrawal took 2 days. Mars with its massive bulk could not accelerate quickly. The entire time Morrison kept his crew locked down with systems minimal, and all eyes away from the darkness outside. Several crew members had to be sedated. 3 tried to open airlocks. 1 managed to breach a maintenance corridor and was lost to space, still smiling and still reaching toward the sphere. When Mars finally crossed back into normal space, Morrison gathered his senior staff. They looked haunted and traumatized. Some could not stop shaking. Morrison told them they found the answer. The question of what was in the silent zones. The answer was something old. Something that saw consciousness itself as a resource or a target. Whatever built those structures were not like them. They did not think like anyone understood thinking. And they were very patient. Grant asked what they would tell Earth, what they would tell the Council. Morrison said the truth, that they were right to build Mars, run.